otwarciu tego kina w 1936 roku i był u nas wtedy marszałek, ale nigdy nie było generała amerykańskiego. I ja myślę, że ja się wpisuję w pewną historię tego kina. I pan generał się wpisuje w historię tego kina. Ale tak na serio, bardzo dziękujemy, że zechciał pan być, chociaż jest pan po raz kolejny w Warszawie. Dzisiaj miałem przyjemność rozmawiania z panią Lordą Kwaśniewską i bardzo mile wspominała pana. Przysyłam pozdrowienia. Dzisiaj premiera Niewidzialnej Wojny, jak Chiny w biały dzień przyjęły wolny Zachód. To jest premiera tej książki tutaj w tym kinie. Państwo szukaliście nazwy kina amerykańskiego i właśnie kino Atlantyk jest najlepsze do takiego spotkania. Ale rzeczywiście tu jest tradycja spotkań z książką i mam nadzieję, że pan się będzie u nas czuł jak w domu, u siebie. To spotkanie nie odbyłoby się, gdyby nie wydawnictwo Jeden Świat i pani Aldona na pewno napowie dużo piękniejszych słów wobec gościa i państwa.
Ja witam Państwa w imieniu wydawnictwa Jeden Świat. My jesteśmy wydawcą polskiej edycji książki, która ukazała się w Stanach Zjednoczonych zaledwie 2 miesiące temu. No jest to niebywały sukces. Mamy się czym chwalić, że w tak krótkim czasie udało nam się przygotować polską edycję. A oczywiście zasługa w tym zespołu tłumaczy, redaktorów, naszej wspaniałej graficzki, że udało się to dzień i noc przygotowując ten projekt zrealizować na przyjazd pana generała i dziękujemy bardzo, że przyjął nasze zaproszenie, bo jest osobą niezwykle zajętą i niełatwo jest zorganizować takie spotkanie. Więc doceniamy to, że możemy się spotkać dzisiaj. Nie będę opowiadała o tej książce, bo zrobi to doskonale pan generał. Powiem tylko, że stawia niezwykle trudne pytania i wyzwania przed czytelnikami. Ja myślę, że tak przewrotnie może powiem, że najważniejszym z tych pytań dla mnie jako czytelnika, odbiorcy jest to, jakie są oczekiwania autora wobec nas czytelników po przeczytaniu tej książki, ponieważ mówi ona o niezwykle silnym wpływie Chin, a właściwie komunistycznej partii Chin na kraje demokratyczne, na to, w jaki sposób w krótkim czasie są ograniczane nasze wolności przez reżim komunistyczny. I pytaniem zasadniczym jest to, co możemy, a właściwie co musimy zrobić jako odbiorcy tego przekazu, żeby stać w obronie tych wolności, które jeszcze do niedawna wydawało nam się, że są nienaruszalne, dane raz na zawsze, a wiemy, że tak nie jest. Czym jest niewidzialna wojna, opowie nam generał. Co symbolizuje ten tajemniczy obiekt na okładce książki, to również, mam nadzieję, o tym opowie nam pan generał. Chciałabym jeszcze, zanim poproszę pana generała, zapraszam do rozmowy, przedstawić panią Marię Salzman, która jest takim dobrym duchem i zdradzimy tutaj inicjatorką wydania tej książki na rynku polskim. I tytułem wprowadzenia chciałabym tylko zadać jedno krótkie pytanie. Dlaczego uznała, że jest to tak ważna książka dla polskiego czytelnika i powinna się ukazać właśnie teraz?
Dzień dobry Państwu. Bardzo jestem wdzięczna do generała, bo to, co wiele ludzi starało się powiedział w sposób bardzo jasny i łatwy do przyjęcia dla każdego, moim zdaniem, kto tą książkę przeczyta. Jak ja po raz pierwszy widziałam wywiad z generałem Spaldingiem, mówił tak prosto, takim prostym językiem, że było to zrozumiałe. Zagrożenie, wojna, każdy etap, który się obecnie dzieje, był zrozumiały natychmiast, był przyjmowany. W tym momencie aż mi serce załkało, bo ja zajmuję się Chinami i zagrożeniem, które Chiny, partia komunistyczna Chin tak naprawdę są na co dzień dla państwa, dla każdego człowieka od 1999 roku, kiedy chińska partia komunistyczna, Jiang Zemin oficjalnie powiedział, że zasady moralne, prawda, życzliwość i wytrwałość są niezgodne z zasadami partii komunistycznej, w związku z czym ludzi, którzy je wcielają w życie, mają być wyeliminowani fizycznie, finansowo i ich reputacja zrujnowana. A ja wiem, że moja babcia mnie tych zasad uczyła, to nie są zasady chińskie, chińskich tradycji, są to zasady moralne większości ludzi na świecie. I dla mnie świat bez tych zasad, a raczej z legalizowaniem zakazu wyobrażał się za ciemny i wszystkie dokumenty, które wychodziły z Chin, pokazywały, że jest to wcielane w sposób brutalny, wręcz szatański w każdym aspekcie naszego życia. Ale osoby takie jak ja lub inne osoby, to się mówi teraz prawa człowieka, to się nazywają osoby więźniowie sumienia, którzy na przykład za to siedzą w więzieniu w Chinach, czy są torturowani. Moja mama była w obozie koncentracyjnym, cała rodzina nie podpisała listy. I to było dziedzictwo, które ja odziedziczyłam. To nie nazywały, a żyję, bo byli Niemcy, którzy ich uratowali. To nie nazywały się prawa wtedy człowieka, tylko ludzka rzecz. Więc to poświęcenie, jakie Państwo, mam nadzieję, przeczytają w tej książce, swojej tak naprawdę możliwości kariery, finansów i wiele innych rzeczy, które mógłby kontynuować, nie widząc tego, co się dzieje. Pan generał jest dla mnie świadectwem tego, że ma coś z naszej polskiej waleczności, romantyzmu i w ostatniej chwili do zrywu, do uwolnienia świata, żebyśmy się naprawdę zobaczyli, co się dzieje i jak możemy zrobić to. Także jeszcze raz bardzo serdecznie dziękuję.
Zapraszamy Państwa po tej części, którą właśnie rozpoczniemy, później do zadawania pytań. Ustaliliśmy, że konwencja jest taka, żeby nie zaburzać jakby toku wypowiedzi pana generała, że rozpocznie swobodną wypowiedzią, a później będzie czas na zadawanie pytań.
Well, thank you for such a warm welcome. This is my third time in Poland, and each time I feel like I'm coming back home. So I really appreciate your hospitality, and I really appreciate the historic nature of this theater and the opportunity to talk a little bit about the book. So why did I write the book? You know, if I think back to my childhood, whenever I had a fist fight with somebody, it always was with the bully. I think the biggest thing that I couldn't stand growing up was injustice, and I think bullies epitomize at a basic level injustice because they seek to impose their will on those that are weaker than them, and this is something that I've never been able to abide. You know, I joined the Air Force in 1992, not because I knew anything really about the military. In fact, I thought if you went into the military, then they made you peel potatoes and they yelled at you. And I really didn't find that interesting. But then, of course, back then, a movie came out. You may have seen this movie called Top Gun. And I thought, wow, I didn't know you could have the opportunity to fly jets and ride motorcycles and chase girls. I thought this was the best thing, and so I joined the military. But when I did, and subsequently, each time that I got promoted, you have to take an oath of office, and the oath of office says that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And if you understand the history and the background of the U.S. Constitution, it's really a unique document in history. It is a result of intense study by our founders on all governments that had come before the U.S. Constitution, and really what was the chief challenge of governments everywhere. And the chief challenge was that if any one person, group, or party got ultimate power, then ultimate power is ultimately corrupting and leads to inevitably to oppression. And so our founders designed a constitution that was based on the separation of powers. And then, of course, because they weren't sure that it would work, they gave the American people the Second Amendment, which allows them to keep weapons in order to defend themselves against a government if it ever becomes oppressive. That's what I joined, in addition to flying jets and riding motorcycles. I didn't chase girls because I got married right when I joined the Air Force, so that was out. But I'm glad the cover, the U.S. version, doesn't have this airplane. I'm very proud to have flown this airplane because it is really a marvel of technology. Although it's not completely invisible, it is every bit worth the $2 billion per copy that took to both design and build and operate it. And it is a fabulous machine. It's also a terrible machine. And I was trained to defend our country, but also to, if the time came, to use that weapon system to essentially fulfill my oath to the Constitution. So this book is about a journey that I went on while I was in the Air Force, while I was flying this airplane. In 2002, I went to China to live as a student. There's a program in the United States military called the Olmsted Scholar Program. It was actually created by a two-star general from World War II who was in the China, Burma, India theater. And he, during his time in that theater, he realized that his subordinates didn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture, and therefore they were less effective in working with the local people and other officers of other militaries. And so he was also a banker, a very wealthy gentleman, and so he endowed some money and got the military to agree to send 3 officers from each branch, the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, the Navy, to go abroad and learn a language. So I was selected for this essentially right before 9/11. And I went to our Defense Language Institute to learn Chinese. And then myself and my wife and my 2 sons, ages 4 and 7 at the time, went to Shanghai, China, to live. And I went to school in Tongji University. And it was a tremendous experience. It was educational. I traveled all over the country. By the time I got into the country, I was fairly fluent in Chinese, and that my language even improved while I was there, to the point where sometimes when people would talk to me on the phone, Chinese people, they would think that I was Chinese. So I had really picked up the language well, and we traveled all over. And it was a fabulous time in China. It was 2002 when we got there in the summer. Of course, they had just joined the WTO, and there were skyscrapers going up all over Shanghai. There was factories being built by all of my country's top corporations. In fact, a lot of those people that were building factories were my neighbors. And I got to hear some of the stories that they had and the challenges that they had in doing business in China. But for the most part, those 2 years convinced me, particularly at the end in 2004 when I returned to my country, that I wanted to go back to China. I wanted to live there. I wanted to work with the Chinese people because they had treated us so well, and because it was really a thriving, growing, incredible place. This is the China that I was introduced to, and this is the China that I thought I knew. Of course, over time, as time went on, I kept getting promoted. I was a young major when I originally went to China. As I moved up the ranks, I became the commander of the B2 unit, and of course did my time eventually in Iraq, and both on the ground and in the air. So I served my country. I did participate in some of the things that were going on in the Middle East, but for the most part, my mind was always on China. As I went through my career, I would go and work in staff jobs, and those staff jobs would inevitably have a relationship with China. So my first staff job was with the Office of Secretary of Defense, and I worked on a PLA, which is a People's Liberation Army U.S. military archive agreement, so that we could have access to their archives, so that we could find the remains of our missing from the Korean War. They had controlled the Korean War camps. Later, I was made the chief China strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the Pentagon, and then eventually became the defense attaché and the senior defense official in Beijing, and then ultimately I finished my career as the senior director for strategy at the White House. And during that time, I worked on our current national security strategy. And so the progression that went from me wanting to go back, live in China and work in China was really occurred during the last 5 years of my career, when I was really focused on China, particularly as the working for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as his China strategist. And it was at this point that I began to understand and learn about the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And as you go through the documents of the Chinese Communist Party, and there's not a lot of them, because they are probably one of the most secretive organizations, but there are some. For instance, there's a group of documents that are referred to as the Tiananmen Papers. And the Tiananmen Papers talk about, or really represent the conversations that the Chinese leadership was having around the decision to essentially order the crushing of the protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989. And there's also the Chinese Communist Party Constitution. Many people do not know that China has two constitutions. There's the People's Republic of China Constitution, and there's the Chinese Communist Party Constitution. Now, that may seem odd that they would have two constitutions, but the constitution that actually governs the Chinese people is the Chinese Communist Party Constitution. There's also document number 9, which is also an internal Communist Party document that was leaked, like the Tiananmen Papers, that talk about the things that we hold dear in the free world: democratic principles, human rights, civil liberties, rule of law. And these things in document number 9 are not referred to very positively. In fact, they are characterized not as what we believe them to be universal values. They're characterized as a threat, a mortal threat to the Chinese Communist Party. And in fact, document number 9 goes on to say that this mortal threat must be countered. When you look at the Tiananmen Papers and you understand that the Chinese Communist Party during the Tiananmen massacre essentially learned 3 lessons. Number 1, China is being attacked by the United States. Not the students are protesting on their own volition, by the United States, in league with the students, and the ultimate intent of the United States is to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. Number 2, that we need the Chinese Communist Party leadership. We need access to technology, innovation, talent, capital, but we absolutely cannot have the transfer of democratic principles. These ideas of human rights or civil liberties cannot ever take root in China, because this will lead to the end of the Communist Party. And then, of course, the third thing is, if the Communist Party ever gets separated from the people, then the Communist Party would fail. And so these 3 lessons are the lessons that drive the Communist Party. And this is what I learned as we were beginning to understand that, you know, I had trained for over 2 decades to employ this weapon system to defend my country and to promote those universal principles. And in reality, you could see in the world, through the United Nations and the WTO, the slow erosion of those principles. For example, today the UN Human Rights Council, the most recent member of the UN Human Rights Council is Venezuela, probably one of the most ruthless totalitarian regimes in the world, but yet it sits on the Human Rights Council. And so if you look across the international order at essentially what was designed to promote these principles, a system that was designed to promote not just the end of conflict, but also the promotion of democratic principles, rule of law, civil liberty, and really freedom, that the continuation of these things was actually slipping away. And in fact, one of the most poignant moments in my time at the White House occurred in the summer of 2017, when the EU, for the first time, failed to condemn China for human rights violations at the United Nations. So here I was, the pilot of the most powerful, what I believe the most powerful weapon system in the world, no longer, in an organization no longer able to promote the principles that we hold dear, that the free world really holds dear, and that I had watched and I believe had triumphed at the end of the Cold War. And so what was the problem? What was the challenge? And the challenge really was that, in the United States, our corporate sector, our financial sector, academia, our think tanks, our consulting firms, our lobbying firms, our political organizations, really all of the institutions that we believed were there to promote democratic principles, both in the United States and abroad, had essentially found themselves, because of our foreign policy, aligned with the Chinese Communist Party. Now this may sound odd, an American company allies itself with the Chinese Communist Party. But when you look at the world today, and you look at it in a different light, and you say, you know, what is the purpose of globalization? In the United States foreign policy, the theory of open markets lead to wealth, an economic theory, was paired with the theory of wealth leads to democracy, a social theory, the theory of modernization. So the belief that if we just opened up to authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, that they would democratize. This is what has been essentially our foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. Now, I won't address the issue in the Middle East. I think I will suffice it to say that I think we could have spent $2 trillion in a lot more positive ways. When my colleagues went to the Middle East, I went to China. And so I've always been focused on what are the challenges of such a large economy, the number 2 economy in the world, if you don't count the EU, and its influence on our society, and what does that mean for the future of democracy. And so when President Trump was elected in 2016, you know, we were already 2 years into a very detailed study of this challenge posed by the Chinese Communist Party. And so this, you may have heard in the news media that this change has come about because of the Trump administration, when in fact I had a team in the Pentagon that started working on this issue in 2014. And so it was not, didn't happen overnight. It was through a lot of intense study. It was actually reading thousands of pages of documents, analyzing the challenge of globalization and the internet to the promotion of democratic principles throughout the world, and then what we needed to do as a society to counter that. And I think the one thing that I think is most poignant for me, in addition to everything that I've talked about, is the evolution of technology and how today it has really advantaged or enabled authoritarianism or totalitarianism to be dominant over democracy. And it's really about the same kind of understanding that led to Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This idea that we have now this ability to not just aggregate data, because that has been consistent, but to take that data and to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually be able to use it to understand not just what societies are doing, but what individuals are doing. And then using the power of e-commerce and social media networks to then begin to influence those people. That's what Google and Facebook and Amazon have been building, the algorithms to influence people. These are the same algorithms that these large tech companies, these have been moved over out of our democracy into a totalitarian regime that actually, so these same algorithms and techniques and technologies power Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And so today, these technologies are used in China to, of course, get them to buy shoes, but also to begin to influence their behavior in ways that ensures that there's conformity. Now, if anybody in here was alive during the time of the Soviet Union, then they know the power of a totalitarian regime in that world. But a totalitarian regime in a digitized world has a wholly different capability. If you think back to our Second Amendment, where we give a gun to, or guns to, the population to defend themselves, and you find yourself in a world where you may not know who's oppressing you, or even that you're being oppressed, then the gun begins to lose relevance. And so we've reached a point in our society in our digitized, globalized, internet-connected society where the population has the ability to understand that it's being oppressed or and really to do anything about it. And it's all surrounding the ability to control who has access to, who can use, and for what purpose your data. And so in the national security strategy, we considered this. Should a government, should any company have access to your data without your consent? And in reality, with the growth of artificial intelligence and its power to essentially do things like 4 days after the 2016 elections, presidential elections in the United States, where 15,000 people marched to the Trump Hotel in New York City, ostensibly because they were angry because of President Trump was elected. So this was totally created by the American people, when in reality, upon further analysis, it was the Russians doing what the Russians do everywhere, which is atomization. They try to break up societies because it improves their position, they believe, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. The Chinese, of course, do something completely different. It's called obfuscation. It's hiding everything. It's hiding it in plain sight. And that's why I think that I was really well positioned to understand this subtle influence that begins to creep over the society using the technology and the business models of today that we have created in the West, but repurposing them for influence at the individual level. And so today, if you have the wrong friends, you smoke, you drink, you jaywalk, you protest the government. Essentially, if you're not a good citizen, then you can show up to catch your flight for your vacation and realize that you're not allowed to board, of course, a train or a bus, or maybe not. You can't. Your child can't get selected for a university. And if you think about this in a globalized world, where Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent begin to converge and merge with Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. So they, by the way, all of them have artificial intelligence research centers in Beijing, because they see the enormous power of China and the ability to collect data and then use it. And they realize that their business models are threatened. And over time, what you will see is Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. Baidu will take over Google, Alibaba will take over Amazon, and Tencent will take over Facebook and Netflix. These are the trends that are happening right now in front of us, and the pipes for this, the computing platform and the pipes for this will be the networks built by Huawei. Now, of course, in the West, we have our telecommunications networks are essentially stagnant. Our companies are broke. They're full of debt because they invested a lot of money in 4G networks, but all of the profits that were taken out by the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So they don't have any money to build networks. The way that this is being built is because Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, because they're controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party can force them to subsidize the network. Thus you get what we have today, which is a proliferation of one company essentially building networks everywhere. Why? For the purpose of having the data. The data is really the source of value for everything in the digital world, much like oil in the 20th century. This is a challenge that we have going forward. How do we snap out of our slumber, wake up, rise up, and begin to understand that our world is being crafted without our knowledge or participation by powers that really don't have our own interests in mind. If we're talking about large tech companies, it's all about selling your data for profit. If we're talking about China, it's all about taking your data and making sure that you don't oppose Chinese interests. So this is a world that this book talks about. It talks about
it gives you the background, the context for where the United States has been going since 2017 with the release of the National Security Strategy. It talks about what we need to do to protect ourselves from this. It talks about how we need to begin to invest in our communities again, invest in our people, invest in their education, and how we can work together as democracies to counter this slow erosion of freedoms going forward. And I think for me, it's a call to arms. I wore the uniform of my nation's military, and I realized that unless I left and wrote this book, that I couldn't talk about why the United States was changing, why we saw these challenges, what we needed to do, and ultimately, I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to come to Poland and share that. And finally, I want to say, you know, I'm in just a huge debt of gratitude to the publisher and to the translators and the designer of the cover and everybody that has been so warm and welcome in helping me bring this message to Poland, because I think it's not just an American message. It is a message for any free country, any free people, anywhere that that seeks to preserve that democracy in the 21st century. So, questions?
Chciałam zapytać pana generała, co myśli o naszej strategii bliskich relacji z rządem Chin. Close relationships with Chinese government, at the same time friendly relationships with the American government. What do you think?
So when I was, as we were developing the strategy, I would receive delegations at the White House. This was in 2017, and they would come and they would say, well, you know, particularly if they're from Asia, don't force us to choose, because we want to do business with China, and then we want to have a security relationship with the United States. And I would say, well, it's very easy. Not choosing is actually a choice. If you choose to ally for business, economic, finance, trade, and your data with China, but want to have a security relationship with the United States, then this is really a failed strategy. Because we realize now that that relationship is undermining our collective security. And so what the National Security Strategy seeks to do is what we call forge a new consensus. First of all, what's the challenge that we face for democracy going forward? And really it is about this technology and business that really overpowers democracies. And then with that, how do we work together as democracies to protect ourselves? And what we realized, and what the document talks about, is it is no longer sufficient to be a security partner of the United States. That doesn't protect us. We could have thousands of these. This is not the war that we face. The war is in your day-to-day lives. It is in your slow willingness to essentially not speak up about what you feel or what you think are your rights, because you're worried about your company firing you, or your child not getting into a school, or you not getting, you know, something that you need. This is the challenge that we face now. It's not the challenge of tanks and bombs. And so the relationship has to change. We can't rely on military alliances alone. Economics, finance, trade, information has to be just as strong. In other words, just like during the Cold War, democracies have to tightly link together and keep out the authoritarian or totalitarian regimes. And to the extent that nations don't want to do it, then I think they're going to find themselves less and less a partner of the United States, because we are trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to protect our freedoms. And we want to do that in league with democracies that see the challenges the same and want to do the same for their people.
Dzień dobry, ja się nazywam Michał Orzechowski. Jestem działaczem praw człowieka. Do you have translation or? Should I speak in English? English or Polish? English, okay. Hello, my name is Michał Orzechowski. I'm a human rights activist. First of all, I would like to welcome Mr. General to Poland and congratulations for the book. And I would like to welcome Mr. General to Poland, the country where in our constitution it's in English, is okay? Or?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a human rights activist, and I welcome you to Poland, the country which in our constitution has Article 13. It's literally written that communism is forbidden in our country, and it could be jailed up to 2 years. And a lot of people here, including me, in this room also, we have the idea of the from the Minister of Internal Affairs, people who are fighting. We are licensed anti-communists. Okay, we have like an idea. We were like fighting against communism, and many people on this, even here in this room, including Maria and me and people from Falun Dafa and human rights, for many years we had meetings, conferences in Polish Parliament, other public about communism, about the threat of communist return of the communists in Russia and China. I also work for Free Tibet. The problem is, America now is aware that there's a problem. And for many years, America had a very pragmatic way of cooperating with the lesser evil. During the Second World War, there was a cooperation with Soviet Union against the Nazi Germany. From 60s, started to be cooperation, and then it was on expense of the countries of our region, here in Poland. We've been left. From 60s, Nixon administration, and then others like Clinton, they started to cooperate with lesser evil called China, communist China, against the bigger evil, Soviet Union. So I'm giving you the perspective of my question. We've been telling these things to you Americans for many years. We are very happy that you're getting the message better late than never. The question is, if in the next turn America will start, from my point of view, very, very rightful war with communism and communist China, maybe one day they will pragmatically start to cooperate with, for example, Russia, which will end up disastrously to our region, my country and others. You know what I'm talking about. There is this very, 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 very serious threat. I was personally in Georgia 2008 on the front line in Georgia, and my friends, they are fighting now in Ukraine against Russia. And, you know, do we have a guarantee that the American government will say tomorrow to Mr. Putin, well, let's do something together against Beijing, because Beijing now is very strong because of the many years of the American support, and then they will say, yeah, Central Europe is yours, to Moscow, yeah, you can do here what you want. Thank you.
No, I've heard this. I've heard this complaint many times here in Poland, and I understand where it comes from. Of course, I can't give any kind of guarantee because I am just a citizen of my country. What I can tell you is, I would, as a citizen, fight that to my last breath. I think we value our partnership and our relationship with Europe, particularly the democracies of Europe, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. We don't feel like, as a people, that we're safe just as a democracy unto ourselves. We feel like we need other democracies to work together with us. You know, I'm also aware that we haven't always made the best choices as a nation, but I can tell you that where our freedom is challenged as a people, we rise up, and we are beginning to awaken in the United States, and we are rising up, and we are changing. And so I hope that that in the coming years that we can rise up together. Of course, we
do it only in the spirit of friendship and with the desire to promote the same freedoms that we have in our own country in other democracies. And so, of course, this is not coercive in any way. It is essentially, as it's always been, a relationship based on trust. China and Russia are two sides of the same coin, and they really have no difference in terms of how they look at the individual's rights in a society. And I don't think it's just China that we're dealing with. We're dealing with China, we're dealing with Russia, we're dealing with Iran, we're dealing with North Korea. Frequently we're dealing with countries like Turkey, Venezuela, still Cuba. Authoritarianism or totalitarianism is a scourge on this earth, and it's not going away unless we stand up together and fight it. And
jakby ktoś sobie życzył zadać pytanie po polsku, to ja przetłumaczę.
Tu. Mizerski Zbigniew. Ja się bardzo cieszę, że powstała taka książka. Przepraszam. Ja się bardzo cieszę, że powstała pańska książka i że wreszcie o tym się mówi. Ale też coś chcę powiedzieć. W 1986 roku byłem w Ameryce, w Ann Arbor. I podczas mego pobytu byłem na takim spotkaniu w Kiwanis International Club, gdzie Chairman mówił, prawda, o możliwościach handlu z Chinami. Po tym spotkaniu ja wysłałem listy do moich przyjaciół w Ameryce, wiedząc, czym to grozi Ameryce. Że budując przemysł amerykański, dając im know-how, rynki zbytu w Ameryce i tak dalej, budujemy sobie przeciwnika. To, co miało kiedyś miejsce ze Stalinem, z Hitlerem, prawda, gdzie na kapitale tychże krajów, prawda, rosły potęgi Niemiec i też Rosji, prawda, to samo stało się w Ameryce i teraz Chiny są zagrożeniem potencjalnym dla Ameryki. Mają samoloty nie gorsze prawie już teraz niż Amerykanie, armię mają liczniejszą, ogromny rynek, 1,2 miliarda ludzi, prawda. Mówi się wręcz, że za 20 komputery mają szybsze niż amerykańskie. Na uczelniach amerykańskich, tam gdzie ja byłem w Michigan State University, było naprawdę bardzo wielu studentów chińskich, gdzie część z nich oficjalnie nosiło czerwone krawaty i mówiło, co oni myślą naprawdę o Ameryce. Takiej głupoty i takiej naiwności ja się nie spodziewałem po Amerykanach. I przykro mi właśnie, że jestem rad, że jest to wreszcie zauważone, prawda, i powstała pańska książka, ale ciągle zasięg jest za mały jeszcze. My się cieszymy w Polsce, że powstał w Polsce Bank of China. To jest dla nas też zagrożeniem. Ten bank obsługuje firmy chińskie, których jest coraz więcej. I pieniądze z transakcji handlowej idą nie do banków polskich, a do banków chińskich. To jest też dla nas czymś niekorzystnym. Dziękuję.
yes, when I first started working on this, I think I have this. I'm afflicted with the same thing that most Americans are, and that's this sense of hubris. And I think it comes from the fact that we have two large oceans that protect us and two really friendly borders, and it really, I think, insulates us in a way from the dangers of the world, in certainly, and gives us a different perspective than people that have essentially felt the oppressiveness of communism or authoritarianism. And I think, you know, as I reflect on my own inability to see what was happening within my own society, I think it is a challenge for America to really understand how easy it is to lose your freedom if you don't continue to fight for it. And so all I can say is, you know, we finally woken up, and thank you for being a friend and trying to warn us. I wish we had listened sooner.
Good evening, sir. Łukasz Dębski. I'm a PhD candidate at University of Warsaw. Well, let me start. I will be much more shorter than other speakers, but let me start with a little but important remark concerned the world generally. Post-Second World War, world was much more simpler. NATO against Warsaw Pact, the United States against the Soviet Union. But the contemporary world is much more complicated because on the one hand we have China and Russia. Let's give an example. Give the example of they are our friends and enemies at the same time. This is what we are. What is real problem, I think. And if we are going, well, in the Polish mentality, in the Polish vision of Russia, I will give this example, Russia is a permanent enemy. I personally disagree, because I think that in the world, as I said before, you do not know, in 1 minute China is your friend, and the second is your enemy. Nothing can be said definitively. And my question will concern another example. We have North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was very strong during the Cold War, and now it isn't. We have Mr. Erdogan, who is on the one hand a member of NATO, and on the other hand involved in several global business representing its own interests. What shall we do in that situation? My interest, I very like the United States of America. I have a great respect to your country, and as perhaps everybody here, I'm very grateful we have American soldiers in our country. But I know very well that the only one country which is responsible for the security of Poland is Poland and its authorities. And I understand it very well. I'm not sure my government, this or the previous, understand it as well. But please tell me, what shall we do? The point for me is the only one. I must respect the security of my nation and my country. What shall I do? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's, let's set aside the question of is Russia a friend or an enemy, because I think that can be a very confusing concept, particularly with the same goes for China. So let's don't say they're friend or enemy. It doesn't. I think we should focus on what do they believe. Do they believe in democracy? Do they believe in human rights? Do they believe in civil liberties? Do they believe in rule of law? Do they believe in free trade? I would say across the board, for all the nations that I mentioned today, I would say it's clear that they do not. Okay, what kind of world do we live in? We live in a hyper-connected world, where our societies are interconnected with the countries of the world. If you have a country that has a powerful economy and has a powerful scientific and technology basis, and you allow, that country doesn't subscribe to any of the values or principles that you as a nation subscribe to, then you have to question whether or not that nation should have any contact with your society, right? Because what they will seek to do is suppress your freedoms, because they are fearful that those freedoms may be transferred through that connectedness to their population. You're right. Only Poland can protect the sovereignty of Poland. But in the way that you protect it today is completely different than the way we did in the 19th and 20th century. It's not military force. It's about all of the day-to-day connections of globalization and the internet, understanding how they impact your society, and choosing to ensure that the only ones that have that kind of connectedness actually agree with you about the kind of world that you want to live in. If they don't, then show them the door.
Hi, the General. Thank you very much for this talk. This is Abel Mostenko from HP TV, Go Against the Tide, from here from Poland. I have two questions. One, you previously had clearance, so you saw the data and the numbers. How do you estimate our chances? Can you give us like a ballpark figure, percentage-wise, of winning this war against China? And the second question is, the youth don't really know much about communism. Many of the, my generation, the previous generation, grew up in sort of, freedom, I guess you can say. And so, how would you encourage young people to take a look at this and understand the threat from China? Because they seem to be, all they care about is consumerism. Thank you.
So we are on a path in the United States. Some people call it a path for decoupling. Of course, our Vice President has said clearly that the Chinese Communist Party decided to decouple from the free world when it refused to open up and actually democratize. And so as we continue down this path, I think our chances are quite good. And I feel very confident that whether you're talking about the right or the left in the United States, both parties now fully understand the threat posed in a globalized, internet-connected world by the Chinese Communist Party and other authoritarians, and know that we must protect those connections to our society. As far as, understanding the character of the Chinese Communist Party regime, recently the New York Times came into possession of over 400 pages of internal Chinese Communist Party, some top secret documents that describe the concentration camps that currently exist in China. I would encourage you to go look for those documents and understand what they say, because I think we're all aware of what a concentration camp is, and I think if you think about it, you're horrified that has come back into our world. And then, if that's not enough, I would refer you to the UK Tribunal on organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience. These are people, much like the Uyghurs in China, that are taken from their prison cell and hooked up to a machine that oxygenates their organs, and while still alive, the organs are taken out and given to somebody that needs a heart, a liver, a kidney, or lungs. Now this is the only reason that the UK Tribunal did not term this genocide was because it is done for profit. So if you can imagine, and I know a lot of you can, the horrors of Nazi Germany and some of the horrors that the Soviet Union perpetrated on the Polish people, then you can imagine how terrible it is that these things exist today, and that we in the West do business with the companies that support this kind of behavior. It's truly horrific. And so if that doesn't, make you think about who you're doing business with, then, quite frankly, I have no answer as to what will. Okay, so Maria says the book about organ harvesting is available upstairs in the table.
Dzień dobry. Mógłbym spędzić wiele godzin na rozmowę z Panem, jednakże nie mamy wielu godzin, więc ograniczę się do książki i tego, co Pan uznał za najistotniejsze. Otóż jeśli chodzi o książkę, oczywiście nie zdążyłem jej przeczytać, Przeczytałem tylko na stronie 9 przedmowę i obawiam się, że w większości jest to wyidealizowana nieprawda, której sugeruje Pan, że Stany Zjednoczone, a contrario Chinom, są krajem otwartym, z dostępem pełnym do informacji, który nie ma żadnych tajemnic itd., itd. Oczywiście tak nie jest. USA, podobnie jak każdy kraj, ma mnóstwo tajemnic i sekretów. Dla przykładu podam z dzisiejszych serwisów informacyjnych dowiedzieliśmy się, że rząd Baracka Obamy doskonale wiedział, że w Afganistanie nie było już Bin Ladena. I te całe opowieści, okupacja Afganistanu i nierozmawianie z talibami na tematy pokojowe było związane ze strategią wyborczą. Dzisiaj można było się dowiedzieć o tym z mediów informacyjnych. Zatem z dużym opóźnieniem. Podobnie w Chinach, oczywiście, że wiemy, co się działo od 1948 roku, kiedy Mao Tse-tung dążył i wreszcie w 1949 objął władzę. Wiemy wszystko z opóźnieniem. Podobnie dowiadywaliśmy się z opóźnieniem faktów odnośnie wojny w Iraku, między innymi dość szokującego faktu, o którym ja usłyszałem z mediów kilka tygodni temu, że Saddam Hussein otrzymał informację od ambasadora amerykańskiego, że USA nie ma nic przeciwko temu, żeby zaatakował Kuwejt. Jednak później, kiedy Amerykanie uzgodnili z Arabią Saudyjską interwencję za kwotę 59 miliardów dolarów, ta interwencja nastąpiła. Więc albo pan generał, zajmując się być może tymi specjalnościami jak matematyka, ekonomia, wojskowa, szeroko pojęta, nie zajmował się polityką, a to są sprawy polityczne. Być może te fakty nie były panu znane, ale to są fakty. Więc każdy kraj postępuje tak samo. Oczywiście mam pytanie do pana generała. Jak to się stało? Tutaj pan sugerował, że to była głupota Amerykanów, że oni udostępniali i udostępniają dalej Chińczykom technologię, ale to prawda. I oczywiście nie udostępniali dlatego, żeby Chiny się rozwijały, tylko motywy były ekonomiczne. Nazywając jednym słowem chciwość. Po prostu taniej było produkować w Azji niż w Ameryce. I to, z czym mieliśmy i do dziś mamy do czynienia, bo jeżeli komuś z Państwa się wydaje, że kryzys światowy się skończył, to on się nie skończył. I nie był to kryzys finansowy, tylko był to kryzys gospodarczy. On się przekształcił finansowy. Ale źródłem kryzysu było to, że w 2007 roku najbardziej uprzemysłowiony kraj świata, czyli Stany Zjednoczone Ameryki Północnej, miały 72% dochodu PKB z usług, nie z produkcji. Nie mieli produkcji. Produkcja była w Azji. W ten sposób, ponieważ generalnie Azjaci, według statystyk, należą do najinteligentniejszych nacji na świecie, to nie dziwmy się, że w momencie, kiedy otrzymali narzędzia, skorzystali z nich i zbudowali sobie także potęgę naukową. Możemy zapytać, jak to się dzieje, że jeszcze do niedawna, a tak między nami mówiąc na dzień dzisiejszy też mamy problemy z swobodnym, bezwizowym wjazdem do USA, bo on jest pozornie bezwizowy, bo dalej formalności są podobne do tych wizowych. I Polska
Okay, what's your question?
jak to się stało, że w Ameryce jest w każdym dużym mieście, jest Chinatown. I on rośnie i Chińczycy dostają wizy bez problemu. I wreszcie ostatnia sprawa, która dla Pana wydaje się być najważniejsza, to internet. Otóż serwery główne internetu, jest ich 13, znajdują się w USA i ma do nich dostęp 14 osób na świecie. I sprawa, czy i jaki kawałek tortu mają w tym poszczególne firmy jak Google, Facebook czy podobne, nie ma żadnego znaczenia. Wprowadzając technologię tak zwanej dwustronnej łączności, no to się siłą rzeczy USA, które stworzyło internet i dalej nim włada, bo dostęp do tych 13 serwerów ma 14 osób, Amerykanów. To są główne
Więc jakie było
serwery.
pytanie, przepraszam, z internetem?
Pytanie z internetem było takie, że ponieważ na dzień dzisiejszy
Nie, pytanie.
już Już mówię. Pytanie jest takie.
Are you Polish?
Why are you asking?
Well, because I'm trying to figure out what your question is. Do you care about Polish freedom? Forget about the United States. Do you care about Polish freedom?
Nie, my nie rozmawiamy o polityce. My rozmawiamy o książce. Rozmawiamy o książce i mówimy o zagrożeniu ze strony Chin. Jakie jest zagrożenie, jeżeli chodzi o internet, co Pan kilkakrotnie podkreślił, ze strony Chin w sytuacji, kiedy internetem włada USA?
I think you should read the book, and then we can talk.
To jest pytanie. Przepraszam.
Mariusz Patej, independent publicist. Poland, after the finishing Cold War, created quite an open economy, but we found a permanent trade deficits with China, and it's one of hot problems to be solved by our government. One of the reasons of that deep deficits we found that trade has no symmetry in opening of markets. We also observe that EU policy is very soft, or even with no reaction of Chinese protectionists and dumping practices. Then my question is, how can we cooperate with US just to solve that matter of not symmetry in a trade between Western world and China?
Yeah, so I think the way we look at our relation with our allies and partners is we need to have a discussion at a bilateral level. I think within Europe there is an unequal trade, and a lot of that unequal trade within Europe also results in unequal trade between Europe and China. And what I'm talking about is each nation within Europe has a different trading relationship with China. In particular, the Germans have, they export much more to China than China exports to Germany. But yet, there is a deficit in other countries that you just point to. So I think that has to be addressed within Europe amongst the nations to say, hey, you know, it doesn't do Europe much good in terms of its unity if there's not prosperity for all. And so that's a challenge just of Europe. But for the United States, we have to have market-based, we have to be connected to market-based economies. To the extent that China is not a market-based economy, then we don't want to be connected to them. And to the extent that China uses allies and partners to escape the tariffs that are meant to balance the playing field, then we have to relook our trade relationships with those countries as well. So that's why we are renegotiating and relooking at all of our trade relationships to ensure that slowly but surely the ability for China's non-market-based economy to be connected to us through either directly or through our allies and partners is cut off. If they don't want to play by the rules, then they shouldn't have access to our economies. That's one. Number two, in nearly every case, not in nearly, in every single case where China is investing money in a country, there is corruption. And if you don't believe me, go look at the record. In the courts around the world, there have been cases brought up against Chinese companies for corruption. Now, the U.S. bears some responsibility here because never, not once, not one single time have we brought a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case against a Chinese company. Why? Because it was our policy to not push the Chinese, because we wanted their agreement on climate change. And of course today they're spending $30 billion to build coal-fired plants outside their country. We wanted their cooperation on North Korea. Yet they have 50,000 North Koreans working in China, sending their pay back to the regime, and they have an entire underground economy meant to support the North Koreans. And so it is the fact that the United States has been absent in actually creating the kind of conditions that would protect not only ourselves but other countries. What I'm telling you today is that days are over. The Department of Justice, the FBI, the State Department, the Department of Defense, every single day are going after Chinese companies and Chinese individuals and the Chinese state more and more and more. And you will see very soon Corrupt Practices Act cases brought against Chinese companies.
Dziękuję. Eunika Chojska i Spotkanie TV. Ja właśnie chciałam zapytać o tą chińską propagandę, ponieważ, tak jak też tutaj przed chwilą słyszeliśmy, próbuje się zrównać Stany Zjednoczone z komunistycznymi Chinami. Już nawet nie chodzi o to, żeby krytykować Chiny, ale żeby przynajmniej pokazać, że Stany Zjednoczone też są równie złe jak komunistyczne Chiny. Dzieje się to na polskich uniwersytetach, na przykład tutaj w Warszawie. Pokazuje się studentom na przykład zdjęcia z placu Tiananmen, gdzie chińscy komuniści mordowali studentów, i obok pokazuje się jakieś zdjęcia policji, brutalności policji amerykańskiej. Jakby Pan to skomentował? I jeszcze drugie pytanie, jakby Pan przedstawił kilka takich najważniejszych haseł chińskiej propagandy. I bardzo, bardzo polecam Pana książkę, dziękuję serdecznie. Czytałam po angielsku i czytam też po polsku.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is whataboutism. This is a frequent technique by communist parties to essentially deflect attention from their own behavior. I encountered this many times by delegations that come to the U.S. and try to convince me that we're on a moral level equivalent to the Chinese Communist Party or the leadership in Russia. And I say this, simple question. In this case, it was a delegation from Asia. Do you want the Russians to protect you? Do you want the Chinese to protect you? The answer is no. Do you want us to protect you? The answer is yes. If it ever becomes the case that you would say, I want Russian troops on my soil, I want Chinese troops on my soil, then I think you're totally justified in what you're saying. We are not here to be conquerors. We're here to be friends. And to the extent that these nations criticize us, yet at the same time want us to be there, to back them up, to protect them from Russia and China, then I think they're clearly not being totally transparent with their motives. Oh well, I mean, a very good one that the Chinese, my interlocutors would always tell me from the People's Liberation Army, you've angered 1.4 billion Chinese. And I would say, well, you know, I lived in Shanghai, and not once, never did any of my friends or colleagues or associates or neighbors, never once did they talk to me about the South China Sea. And never did they ever give any indication that they really cared about politics or anything that the Chinese Communist Party is talking about. So in reality, you represent the Chinese Communist Party. You don't represent 1.4 billion Chinese. In fact, in a lot of ways, we don't know what the Chinese people think because, quite frankly, we're not permitted to have a clear, transparent view of who they are. And of course, as I said, they're very warm, kind, generous people. But at the same time, they live in a world where from every single grade level, from kindergarten through university, they are told one version of history and one version only. Their media is completely controlled by the Communist Party. There is a great firewall that ensures that everything that they see that they're not supposed to see from the outside world is kept out from them. In fact, there's many cases of people that have been held against their will and only fed one version of the truth. And of course, Confucius even in the Analects was asked, what would be the first thing that you would do as emperor? And Confucius says, I would rectify the names. And what that means is that what you say about a thing is what you think about a thing. And so your history and what you can have access to and what you can have come into contact with fully informs what you actually understand. It is the case, and this is I've been with the People's Liberation Army on the Yalu River, from here to this front row, from the North Korean shore. And if you look on the right side, going south down the river towards the sea, if you look on the right side, there's skyscrapers. If you look on the left side, there's nothing. And in fact, if you look at the skyline at night, the right side's completely lit up, the left side's completely dark. And so I asked my People's Liberation Army colleagues, don't they look across the river and see and wonder why? And the answer was, yes, but of course they're full of spirit. And I said, I got it. So I mean, it is very much that unless you live in that system and are raised in that system, then you really can't understand the impact it has on your life or the way you think. But certainly the Chinese Communist Party does not speak for all 1.4 billion people.
Dobry wieczór, panie generale. Takie pytanie, w jaki sposób
Proszę Państwa, ponieważ musimy powoli kończyć nasze spotkanie, bo mamy czas z Panem Generałem do 20 i takie ograniczenie, więc proszę o zadanie ostatniego pytania i zaproszę Państwa na górę, gdzie generał będzie podpisywał książki. Ma bardzo ograniczony czas, więc jeżeli chcemy jeszcze mieć podpisane książki, to niestety musimy kończyć. To proszę o zadanie. To będzie krótki czas podpisywania, więc proszę powiedzieć,
Zadajcie pytanie.
Dobrze. W takim razie krótkie pytanie. Jaka może być spodziewana reakcja Stanów Zjednoczonych rządu amerykańskiego w stosunku do tych państw, no to głównie myślę oczywiście Polskę, jeżeli wybiorą ściślejszą współpracę jednak z Chinami ludowymi, na przykład w temacie 5G firmy Huawei.
Well, I think that our relationship will not be as strong.
I ostatnie pytanie, i oddaję oczywiście mikrofon Bronisławowi Ostrowski. Wiadomo jest, że i Europa, i Stany Zjednoczone, nawet Rosja będą zawsze przyjaciółmi. Było zawirowanie po tych zmianach politycznych 70 lat temu w Rosji. Ale jak pan generał myśli, jaki będzie kierunek Stanów Zjednoczonych, jak Chiny przekonają i Afrykę, i Amerykę Południową do swoich racji? Teraz to zaczynają robić. Dziękuję.
I think that's already taking place, and I would say that every nation, the people of every nation have to decide for themselves what kind of nation they want to be. I don't think it's for us to say that you should be a democracy or an authoritarian society. I think we believe in self-determination, and people determines their own fate. It is not for us to determine it for them. So to the extent that we offer a vision of the world that we think is the right one, I think we stand as a beacon as long as we are true to those values and principles. The minute that we stop believing in them or fighting for them, well, then that will be the end of America.
Bardzo dziękujemy. Zapraszamy Państwa na górę. Tam pan generał będzie podpisywał książkę do godziny 20.
Jak są gotowe, żeby być jeden, to nie ma problemu, żeby być dwa. No, gotowe na pewno. Z czym się przykopywać?
To daleko z tej projekcji, nie daleko pierwszy.
Sorry, perhaps if I were American, I had exactly the same position as you have.
Witam. Zaraz podejdziemy, może Pana przedstawię.
Czyli Pana zdaniem są gotowi być numerem 2, bo im za jedno. O to chodzi, okej.
Że takim bandowcem, żeby takim bandowcem